Welcome to another episode of The Artsy Raven, a show about writing and publishing with your host, J.F. Garrard.
Welcome to the Artsy Raven, and today our special guest is Ellis Scott. So Ellis was born in the UK and grew up in Canada. He has published 9 stories in literary journals, including the Iowa Review, Yolk, and the Fiddlehead. His first short story was nominated for the 2020 Pushcart Prize. Night Terminus is his new novel. So welcome, Ellis.
Thank you for having me.
So can you tell us a little bit about yourself? Like, you were born in the UK and you grew up in Canada. Like, has that sort of influenced you in your writing?
A little bit. I came to Canada when I was 3 years old, so I don't really have a recollection of that. But I was a permanent resident for most of my life, so kind of got around to becoming a citizen very late in life. So I always maintained quite a lot of ties with the UK. And indeed, I mean, a lot of the literature that I read is European and UK based. So some of my favorite authors are from there. So it certainly informed my writing for sure.
Like, is that because your parents read mostly UK novels?
Yes, my father was very well read, and he basically passed on his entire library to me. And that library, occasionally you'd come across a North American writer. This was back in the early '60s, but generally back then, me because of lots of other reasons, distribution and access and all that kind of thing. Most of his literature was European at that point, so that was my first influence.
Okay, so I guess, um, what have you done before you started writing? Like, what was your life like?
So I only started writing at 55. I
Okay.
retired early because of illness. And before I was a writer, I delivered humanitarian assistance. I worked in
Wow.
international relations for most of my life, mostly in NGOs and mostly in conflict zones, in the field for a number of decades, and then as a director after that. But yes, as I said, illness forced me to retire early, and I was looking for a new creative outlet. Obviously, as we just talked about, I've been very inspired my whole life by literary fiction. And I travel a lot now, quite itinerant. So writing, was a creative outlet that came naturally. And so I published my first short story at 55, and now I'm 62, and this is my debut novel.
So, what was the biggest challenge? And like, because you went from short fiction to a novel, like, did you find it difficult to do that?
Well, I published 9 stories over that 5 or 6 year period. And at one point, I just thought, okay, I really want to attack a novel. I really want to write a novel. And I wasn't sure. I mean, it is a big leap. It's a very different mindset to write a novel. And, a short story is a bit of a vignette, and it's one scene often. And so I wanted to make sure that I had the technical ability. I knew that I had the creative ability, but I wanted to get at least a half a dozen, if not more, published stories out before I um, wrote a novel. And so, yeah, after at the ninth, once I published my ninth story, I thought, okay, now I'm going to hunker down and really work at a first novel. And so then I just had to choose the topic.
Did you find it very challenging to like to go
Switch
from
over.
short form? Yeah, to switch over. I mean, short form, there's an end, like sort of an end at
Yes,
the
and it often comes on page
yeah,
four.
the novel just goes on and on sometimes. But yeah.
Yes, I mean, I think my writing style hasn't changed, and my technical ability got better and better, and so it wasn't that bad a transition. The writing of the novel itself took a year and a half, but I found it quite easy to write for lots of different reasons that we can talk about. One of them is the subject matter. The stories kind of spilled out of me, and so there wasn't a lot of thrashing, hair pulling, and that kind of thing. I just waited for the stories to come out. And so, in many ways, the novel, certainly the structure of this novel of Night Terminus, very much resembles a book of short stories. All the stories are connected, but they are six distinct chapters about six distinct people plus an unnamed narrator. And so there's the through line is the narrator, but you can see, I think you can see the short story influence in the novel.
Okay, now can you tell us, like, give us a short synopsis of the Night Terminus?
Mhm. Um, Night Terminus is about the survivors of the AIDS crisis, specifically what happens to them, most of them later in life. The book starts in 1985. The narrator has a one-night stand with a transient young man he meets in Paris, and through that night, a series of secrets are unfold. And then the book basically jumps ahead every 7 or 8 years until the present day, until 2025, which is the last chapter, the sixth chapter. And at that point, we meet a very elderly man who also survived the AIDS crisis, who is struggling with a host of physical and emotional ailments, post-traumatic stress disorder, from burying so many people at such a young age, and is coming to terms with basically the ghosts of his life. And so you really get, I think, through the six chapters that grief process from shock to resolution, but you also get a little vignette, decade by decade, of AIDS survivors.
Now, why do you choose to tell the story through an unnamed narrator?
I did that for a number of different reasons. He very much plays the everyman. As I said, he's the through line or the thread. He takes us by the hand, and leads us through the interactions that he has with these six characters. But I was more interested in making sure his voice was right, rather than naming him. Um, not every story will have a traditional arc. Life is messy, people are left hanging. And so I really, I felt very, because of the subject matter, because the AIDS crisis was so awful and terrible. It's often better in a catastrophe when you're trying to write about the aftermath, to circle around it or to approach it from a distance. It certainly doesn't need your help, in terms of it having gravitas. And so, because of that kind of periscope approach, I thought the narrator, in many ways, also because he is an everyman, didn't need to be named.
Mhm.
And I think it was the right from certainly from the reviews and what I've heard, I think it was the right decision. But that's why he remains unnamed.
Now, were any of the characters like the Louis, Yuri, Frank, were they based on people, or was it book like just inspired generally by the crisis? Or
Yes, many of the characters are amalgams of people that I've met and known in my personal life. And so it is fiction, but there is a lot of, obviously, in any fiction, there's a lot of truth and a lot of experience. Even the fictional characters are based on stories that I've heard from other people, people that they have met. And so there's certainly a grain of truth in all of the chapters. Some of the people are a lot closer to real life than fiction. The character of Rudolph is very close to someone that I knew. The character of Frank, as that you mentioned in the final chapter, is completely fictional, but certainly his gregarious, approach to life and his joie de vivre and his experiences are all things that I've either experienced or my friends have experienced. And so, yes, it's very, very true to life in terms of that. And in terms of the unnamed narrator, I mean, there's a certain amount of me in him as well. Absolutely.
now, did writing this book change any way you thought about a history or a memory that it inspired you to do this?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I'm 62 now. I was a teenager when the AIDS crisis started. And I buried my first boyfriend when I was 19.
Oh,
And
God.
Time is a funny thing. It folds in on itself as one gets older. I think anybody in their 50s, 60s, 70s will tell you. Um, I can remember certain days of the 1980s with such clarity, but if you asked me what I had for dinner last Sunday, I wouldn't be able to.
Yeah.
So short-term
Yeah.
memory, it twists in on itself, and long-term memory becomes much more important as one gets older, which I think is also the reason perhaps why it took me so long to write this novel. I don't think I could have written it when I was 30 or 40 because I was, quite frankly, still living it. And so just as the book is about the aftermath, really, of the AIDS crisis, it's also, quite telling that it took me, until 61 to actually write it. So, so absolutely, when I look back on the things that happened and the grief that struck me so young, I've come to terms with it now, but it did take me a very long time, absolutely.
Now, what do you hope readers take away from this book?
Well, it's funny. I would never presume to tell anybody what to take away from a piece of art, but I would hope that they, um, just as I am when I read a great book that I love, that they're somehow changed a little bit. The dial has moved slightly, or their ideas have been confirmed. That feeling at the end, when you've reached the end of that novel that you love, that you're a little bit less alone, that your worldview is uh, is okay and is it's legitimate, and I hope they also learn a little bit about the AIDS crisis.
Hmm.
It was one of the greatest health catastrophes of the 20th century, and it often gets short shrift. Certainly in literature, there have only been a handful of AIDS novels in the last 15 or 20 years. And as far as I knew, and this is one of the reasons that I wrote the novel, is there are few, if any, novels about the survivors of the AIDS crisis, about the wreckage or the aftermath of the crisis. And so I really wanted to make sure that I added my story. I also realized when I decided on a subject and I started to write it, I realized, as I said, that I was a teenager when the AIDS crisis started, and so most, if no, most, if not all, of the survivors that are still alive are much older than me, and so very soon all of us will be dead. Very soon there'll be no witnesses to the crisis to be able to tell the story directly, and so I thought that was also very, very important to get down on paper, as it were, before all the survivors have gone.
Okay. Now, for people that also want to write, some of them might be scared or they might have other barriers in the way. Do you have any advice for people, or was there any advice people gave you that was helpful?
Oh, so much. For people that are just starting out, I mean, there's so many, especially because of social media, there's so many more ways, than even when I started to connect with other writers to learn the craft. I took courses in university and I started to take workshops locally, but there really wasn't an online presence when I started. And so I think that online groups and courses and teachers and that kind of collective activity around the art of writing is a huge resource for people. And so I would encourage people to seek out those opportunities because they're often free online, connecting with other people that also want to write. I think the library, obviously, librarians in the library make a huge difference in our society, and you should access them. There are free courses available in major cities and again online. And I would really encourage people to just start writing. I mean, it sounds a bit facile, but just start writing down the small but important details of what you see around you and see what comes of it. In terms of writer's block or difficulty writing when you're actually going through the process, there's an old adage. I mean, any writer has heard of it, that if it's not working, you just put it in the drawer for a while, even if it's working. you put it in the drawer. Even if you think it's really, really good, you put it in the drawer for a few weeks or a few months. And it's amazing when you bring it out, what you see, the different lens that you see through it. So I would encourage people to do that. Also, I think the best piece of writing advice I ever received was from one of my teachers who encouraged me to read other things than literary fiction. Read poetry, mythology, read nonfiction, read memoir, read graphic novels, et cetera, et cetera. And that will make you a better person overall, like a more well-rounded person, and invariably make you a better writer. So I would encourage people to go beyond those borders. If you think that you're just going to write romance, or if you're just going to write literary fiction, make sure that you study other genres and learn that craft. It's so incredibly important. I know in my own work, poets and poetry has been a huge influence on my prose.
Okay, now you're going to do a reading from the Night Terminus for us. Can you give us a bit of context before you start?
Yes, the one I've chosen, I'll just give you a little bit of a background. This scene takes place in Brussels after a weekend the narrator has spent with an old acquaintance that he has met up with a few times, named Rudolph. Rudolph is an ex-monk who has left the monastery. He was arrested for indecency in the 1960s for being gay and was put in prison, and watched his first lover die of AIDS in the early 1980s. And so these two are just having a weekend together. On my last morning in Brussels, after another night together, I asked Rudolph if he was happy, a question he found difficult to answer. There are many accomplished violinists, he explained, yet few play in a philharmonic. It doesn't temper their passion for music. Rudolph sought perfection, to be reunited with the all. Despite a lifetime of study, he remained uncertain about what awaited him. There lay his folly, his fall from grace. The closer he came to the center, the more he was repelled. The nothingness at the core of everything, the empty, random awe held no peace for him, only turmoil. He feared becoming a small, solitary figure again, a child alone with his terror. This was a feature of quantum mathematics, he explained, that only chaos exists in the marrow. Perhaps I should have been a mathematician instead, he said. Only death will show if I'm wrong. I ask your pardon, as always. The irony isn't lost on me that I tried everything to avoid death all these years. Many years ago, you asked me what I was running from. You never told me what you were running from. Abandonment, I said. A long time ago, I stopped running. I was betrayed and institutionalized. I felt hunted ever since. Put another way, you could say I'm running from the hunter. Packs are harder to kill than strays. We moved outside and sat in the garden with my bag at the door. His name was Jan Koopman, Rudolph said. Who is that? I asked. The young man I followed into the woods who first arrested me. It wasn't difficult to access my criminal file and find his name once I was a lawyer. And it was easy to locate him. He was a police officer for 40 years, married and childless, living at the same address his whole life. I drove to his home in Harlem many times over the decades, sometimes parking for hours, but never knocked on the door, although I followed him once to a local bar and sat at a table a few meters away, observing his movements. You didn't hurt him, did you? My monastic robes may be soiled, but I haven't lost my mind. His wife would often garden out the front of their house in the mornings, planting delicate flowers, her hands covered in soil, until 10 years ago when I saw Jan holding her arm as she hobbled along the road with a cane, always staring up at the sky, pointing at nothing with a bandaged hand. Did you ever confront him? Rudolph shook his head. I went one last time a few years ago. His wife's skin was bruised. She was very thin and had on a bicycle helmet and cheap silk slippers. Jan held on to her tightly, and they both looked quite disheveled. I got out of the car and went to his side. Jan asked me if I could assist getting his wife through the front gate and was nothing but grateful to me for the help. When he finally maneuvered her up the path and through the door, he turned and waved at me. I started the car and sat there for a few minutes weeping, and then drove away. He put his hands together and brought them to his trembling lips. "It's like a fog has cleared," he said. "It doesn't make me happier, but anger gives me meaning." "I trust your anger," I said. "Don't let anyone dissuade you from it or tell you otherwise. Anger saved us from extinction." "I still have two souls in my body," he said. "The one I nourished and the one I starved. They don't overlap. Half of me haunts the other half. The soul I starved slowly, but I wasn't running from danger. I was running from power. I shouldn't have hesitated. Instead of waiting on that platform as a child, I should have kept on walking and never turned back like you."
Well, thank you very much for taking the time to speak to us today. The Artsy Raven is produced by Dark Helix Press. Introduction voiceover by Chris Gorman. Music by Tim Moore. Please access your bonus content on the Patreon website. Thank you very much for listening, and please